Why should we believe what we would call the modern interpretation, that it is about Israel? Why would people buy that?
Yeah, I think there's something in the psyche, something in the heart, something in the mind that this is more Jewish, that this is what I've inherited. To believe that Isaiah 53 is about Israel is, for the Jewish mind, is at home with Judaism, but is it at home with the Tanakh?
So,
Shalom, my friends, and welcome to another video where we, of course, debunk Pastor Eduardo, and let's take a little look here. The infamous Face of Jews for Jesus, Jeff Morgan. So, buckle up. We're going to get into the core of the debate, Isaiah 53, and they're asking the wrong question. Let's be real. Messiah or Israel, why can't the servant be both? We're going to answer that question as these charlatans and outright liars, because by the end of this video, you're going to see these people have completely distorted what the rabbinic tradition says from beginning to end regarding how the servant is seen in rabbinic literature and also the Tanakh, if we're being honest with ourselves. So, strap in and let's get into it. And please like, share, and subscribe so that we can get rid of these lies and spread the truth of the Torah.
today is Eduardo Arroyo from Radar Apologetics. He has a great YouTube channel. Go check it out and subscribe. Eduardo has an amazing...
Well, maybe not. Maybe don't subscribe to him. But subscribe to me, because why would you want to subscribe to a liar like this man here?
depth of knowledge of rabbinic tradition, Talmud, Mishnah, rabbinic sources, and he talks in depth in his videos on his YouTube channel about these topics. But today we're going to be talking about Isaiah.
He talks in depth and he completely distorts them, as you will see.
53, the chapter that everyone likes to debate. Messianic Jews, Christians, we like to say that it talks about the Messiah. And many rabbis will say, well, no, this is the people of Israel. And I think the majority of Israelis or Jewish people will agree that it's definitely talking about the people of Israel. But what if the ancient Jewish voices actually agreed with the Messianic or Christian interpretation?
That would change everything. That would flip it all on its head. It would really turn around the whole Jewish perspective.
So both of these men, Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan, are actually misrepresenting the Jewish position on this, the rabbinic position on this at its core. And I'm going to prove it to you, right? We're going to go right to the man himself, right? Rabbi Tovia Singer. This was his debate back in, I believe it was July 2022 in Nashville, Tennessee, against Dr. Solberg, where he says this. This is what Tovia Singer is saying is the official rabbinic position on Isaiah 53 and who the servant refers to.
What I want to convey is that people do not understand what it is that Jewish people believe about Isaiah 53. We do not believe that Isaiah 53 is speaking about the righteous remnant of the Jews and not the Messiah. We don't believe the Messiah is not included in that. The Messiah is a prominent, the most prominent figure at the end of days of the righteous remnant of the nation of Israel. And that's why the Talmud says, if you want examples of what will this remnant be like, of course, please do look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16, that the nation of Israel will be humble and there'll be no deceit in its mouth. The same exact words as Isaiah 53. So the Targum, you're right, and Isaiah 52 says, Avdi Mashiach, my servant, the Messiah. But then when you begin 53, it says it's talking about all the nation of Israel. Why do people sort of...
Saving Moses. So you can see, let's be real. When we look at Isaiah 53, keep that in mind, right? What Rabbi Tovia Singer said, and then see how they're trying to create what is called a false dichotomy. They're trying to say that, well, it has to be the Messiah or Israel. It cannot be both. But we're going to show the hypocrisy of how Christians interpret the Tanakh and how they will use prophecies to say, well, it can be a dual prophecy, but they will not give Isaiah 53 that same courtesy. So let's expose that hypocrisy right here and right now.
And make a strong case for Yeshua actually even being the Messiah.
Yeah, well, let's do that. So what's the earliest Jewish evidence we have that Isaiah 53 was seen as messianic and not the nation?
Sure, Jeff, from the 1st century, we have Targum Jonathan, which possibly could even be from earlier, and refers to the person in Isaiah 52 and 53 as my servant, the Messiah.
So we just heard Rabbi Tovia Singer, and please excuse this ad.
Jesus is here to save babies and toddlers, where the need is most urgent and the care is least.
So you can see, he just mentioned that Isaiah 53, when it refers to the Targum, that it also includes not just the Messiah, but also the righteous remnant of Israel, at the very least, right? We can look at that right here, right now. Here is Isaiah 52. This is, what a lot of people say is the introduction to who the servant refers to. Even Christians agree with this, right? Because it says, behold, my servant, and this is what Pastor Eduardo was referring to when he said that it refers to the Messiah. No one has a problem with that it has a messianic reference. It says, he shall be exalted and extolled, and he shall be very strong. And the house of Israel anxiously hoped for him many days, which was poor among the nations, and their appearance and their brightness being worse than that of the sons of men. Well, in the original text of Isaiah 53, it appears to say, or Isaiah 52 rather, here, it says, indeed, my servant shall prosper and be exalted and raised to great heights. But then look what it says here. Just as the many were appalled by him, so marred was his appearance, unlike that of a person, in his form beyond human semblance. Interesting. So in the Targum, it uses the plurality when it says their appearance and their brightness being worse than that of the sons of men in Isaiah 52:14. According to the Targum, it's plural, but in Isaiah 52:14, it says him. So the Targum identifies the servant as being more than one person, not just the Messiah. We see this again in Isaiah 53, verse 10, where it says, he might see offspring and he might have a long life, right? And through him, God's purpose might prosper. So the Christian interpretation, Pastor Eduardo would have us believe, well, it says him, it's in the singular, so it has to refer to only the Messiah. But wait, you want to bring up the Targum, okay? You're so concerned about what the Targum has to say, right? Right, Pastor Eduardo? So let's see, does it only say him? It says it was a pleasure of the Lord to refine and purify the remnant of his people, so that's a plurality of people, in order to cleanse their souls from sin, that they might see the kingdom of their Messiah. So the Christian brain shuts off and they say, look, it says the Messiah. It validates the Christian position. But you would be wrong, because the next verse, part of the verse says that their sons and their daughters. Is there a singular individual? Are sons a singular individual? Are daughters singular individuals? Or are these pluralities that they might multiply, right? And prolong their days? Is that a singular him, like it says in Isaiah 53:10 in the text? He might see offspring and he might have a long life. Well, if you actually care what the Targum has to say, it understands this as a plurality of individuals, the remnant of his people, which is a part of Israel and not exclusive to the Messiah. So we have already debunked Pastor Eduardo's insistence that the Targum validates his position that Isaiah 53 can only refer to the Messiah when it refers to the suffering servant. The Targum disagrees.
Okay, so that's the Targums, but is there anything further, maybe a few centuries later, that solidifies that interpretation?
Sure. Going all the way from the Targums up to the 5th century, there are sources that reinforce that. But if we go directly to the Talmud, if we go to Sanhedrin 98b, it says the Messiah, what is his name? And they call him the leper scholar, linking him to Isaiah 53. He's someone who essentially bears the sins of Israel. He becomes afflicted. He becomes leprous for them, basically taking on their pain and punishment.
Wow, so Pastor Eduardo, it's very interesting that you only focused on Sanhedrin 98b, like most charlatan lying Christians do, and completely ignored Brachot 5a, where it says explicitly in Isaiah 53:10 regarding this in the Talmud, this verse illustrates that whomever God delights, he afflicts with illness, right? It does not say that this is exclusive to one singular individual. It is referring to the concept, right? And it's even quoting from this verse, Isaiah 53:10, to see if his soul would offer itself in guilt, that he might see his children and lengthen his days, that the desire of the Lord might prosper by his hand. And remember, the rabbis knew what the Targum says, and we know that, what do we know what the Targum says? That it refers to more than one person, their days and their sons. So when the Talmud is quoting from this, it understands and recognizes the Targum's interpretation. So this is explicitly telling us that Isaiah 53:10 refers to a multiple group of people, namely the righteous remnant of Israel, and not a singular individual. So We have already debunked Pastor Eduardo's insistence that the Talmud validates exclusivity of the Messiah being the servant in the Targum's interpretation of Isaiah 53, as well as the Talmud. So moving on to debunk the rest of Pastor Eduardo's nonsense, as well as Jeff Morgan from Jews for Jesus.
Okay, so what we're saying is that this interpretation stands through the first century, all the way through what we're looking at the 4th, 5th century already?
4th, 5th century, yeah.
When the Talmud was starting to be written down?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, why is it important, though, to talk about these rabbinic sources? Because, you could say, well, these guys agree with the rabbinic sources, but yet they're trying to disprove rabbinic Judaism.
Sure. Well, it just proves that our interpretation is thoroughly Jewish and at home with some of the voices of Judaism. We're never trying to say, okay, because the rabbis believe X, Y, Z, we're going to believe X, Y, Z.
Right.
Of course you're not, because if you actually believed what the rabbis believed, then you would recognize what we just saw in the Targum and in Brachot 5a, where it explicitly understands that the servant does not refer to one singular individual, the Messiah, but inclusive of the Messiah, at the very least, the righteous remnant, which disproves your entire thesis that Isaiah 53 can only refer to one singular individual who you claim Jesus to be. The Talmud doesn't validate that at all.
Often Messianic Jews are challenged with, is this truly a Jewish interpretation? And they would say, it's not Jewish. This is not at home with Judaism. No one who's Jewish would believe this. But yet in their own sources of rabbinic Judaism, we can see these interpretations that the Jewish disciples of Jesus would have had.
I see.
And even going forward, if we go to the 7th and 9th century, in Midrash Tanchuma, which is another Agadic rabbinic work, it contains references to a suffering Messiah, drawing on Isaiah 53 as well.
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're actually taking the challenge of, well, this has nothing to do with Judaism. Christianity is stealing from the Tanakh. They're making up and putting up their own interpretations into these messianic prophecies. But what we're actually doing here is we're actually showing from within rabbinic Judaism, from within post-Second Temple period Judaism, that the concept of Isaiah 53 speaking about an individual person who was sinless, bearing the sins of the people, is in perfect alignment with our faith.
100%.
It's not, because you're ignoring the interpretations that are inclusive of not just a singular individual, which are rampant all the way starting at the Targum, pervading into the Talmud, and beyond, which of course, now we're going to get into the part where Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan perpetuate this lie that the idea of Isaiah 53 referring to more than one person was invented by Rashi in the Middle Ages. This is a pervasive lie, and Pastor Eduardo shamelessly perpetuates this along with this Jeff Morgan charlatan. So we really got to stop these guys from perpetuating these lies. It's just absurd at this point. They just keep saying it over and over and over again. So we're going to fight back every time. Every time we're going to fight back. So please like, share, and subscribe so that we can stamp out these lies and get these liars to be exposed for what they are.
100%.
Yeah. So if this was the agreed upon interpretation of Isaiah 53, that it's speaking about an individual, the Messiah, there had to have been some sort of turning point.
Yeah.
And when was this turning point? When did we start to see a change in this interpretation?
Sure, around the 10th or 11th century, even up to the 12th, when the rabbis started writing down and codifying their interpretation of the text, really polemically, in response to Christian claims that the servant is in fact the Messiah, they began to codify their own interpretation. So we have Rashi in the 11th century saying...
So, as we just said, he's already bringing up Rashi, trying to falsely claim that he made up the idea that Isaiah 53 refers to more than one person. We've already proved that's not true.
That Isaiah 53 is about Israel.
Who's Rashi then?
Rashi is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, and he really was a French rabbi who sort of was a polemicist in many ways. In reaction to the Karaites, who really rejected the oral tradition, Rashi began to write down his interpretations in order to solidify them polemically against them.
So, since they're already doing this, let's fight fire with fire, right? Anybody who's familiar with basic, refutations of this and showing the hypocrisy of Christianity knows that Origen, one of the early church fathers who lived, this was one of the early church fathers, right? So this is, a lie that has been spread for so long, and Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan are shameless in perpetuating it. So it says, is it true? This is from the Jews for Judaism website. Is it true that Jews interpreted Isaiah 53 as referring to the Messiah until the medieval commentator Rashi explained it as referring to Israel? Let's find out, right? It says they claim this, that he made it up, But this missionary allegation is refuted even by a Christian source. In Contra Celsium, written in 248 CE, some 800 years before Rashi, the church father Origen records that Jews contemporary with him interpreted this passage as referring to the nation of Israel. And he wrote, I remember that once in a discussion with some who the Jews regarded as learned, I used these prophecies, Isaiah 52, 53 through 53:8, and this Jew said that these prophecies referred to the whole people as though of a single individual, right? Not just one singular individual, since they were scattered and smitten in the dispersion, right? As a result of the scattering of the Jews among other nations, that they might become proselytes, right? So this was a church father admitting that the early Jewish interpretations 800 years before Rashi understood that this servant of Isaiah 53 is not exclusive to the Messiah, but to a plurality of people. And we've already shown that in the Targum, we've shown that in the Talmud, and Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan continue to perpetuate this lie because they know that ignoramuses will follow this and they're going to peddle these lies till the end of whenever. I don't know why. I don't understand. Pastor Eduardo and Jeff Morgan, can you please explain to me, why do you keep doing this? Like, can you please have some level of integrity in, if you really hate Judaism this much, can you at least represent it accurately when you try to peddle your lies and try to convert Jews to Christianity? I don't know. I think people would respect you. I would respect you more. Anyway.
These were not his only opponents. Rashi also was doing polemics against the Christians, and this is why he solidified his interpretation that way.
And that actually makes sense because as Rashi's witnessing persecution of Jewish people coming from the church, right? This is real history. You can't look at that and say, wow, if Jesus is their God and they're killing us, our interpretation must be inaccurate. We have to come up with a different interpretation because theirs can't be true.
Absolutely. And he's not the only one who did this. Going forward, we have Ibn Ezra, who also agreed with Rashi that this was about Israel. Also, Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, also said that this was about Israel being the...
Yeah, because the Talmud said it and the Targum said it. This wasn't made up by Rashi or Radak or anyone, right? Or the Ibn Ezra. They were just following the tradition that was handed down to them that pre-existed even any of this, right? This is what Judaism believes. It's in the Tanakh. It literally says in Isaiah 49:3, right, that the servant is Israel. It says, he said to me, you are my servant Israel in whom I will boast. And ultimately this servant is to be a light to the nations. Isaiah 49:3-6. That's simple. No, but you want to distort rabbinic literature to try to say that Rashi made it up? You want to do this? You really want to play this game? You really want to keep doing this, Pastor Eduardo? You really want to do this? You really want to do this, Jeff Morgan?
Servant. And this becomes really solidified within Jewish thought, where now we find that the 21st century sound bites of rabbinic Judaism don't agree with those earlier sources that we cited that say that this in fact is about the Messiah.
Okay, so who do you trust then?
You have to trust the Tanakh. You have to go back to the different scriptures that tell us exactly who it is about. Because it isn't about...
Right, if you trusted the Tanakh, then you would read Isaiah 49:3 and the end of the argument would be right there. You are my servant Israel in whom I will boast, who's going to be a light to the nations. That's it. But no, you want to say Israel, a secret code word for Jesus, even though nowhere in the Hebrew Bible does it use the word Israel to exclusively refer to the Messiah anywhere but your eisegetical interpretation of Isaiah 49:3. Pastor Eduardo has no shame in doing that because that's exactly what Dr. Michael Brown does, right? He's just Dr. Michael Brown nosing, which is why I always put a mustache on Pastor Eduardo, because this charlatan who even the Christian world has come up against recently, if you watch this video here, it's everything that Pastor Eduardo is saying here. Dr. Michael Brown said the same thing. Jeff Morgan and Pastor Eduardo are just regurgitating ideas that Dr. Michael Brown popularized that have already been debunked. And I already debunked them here in this video here, my debate challenge to Dr. Michael Brown, which Dr. Michael Brown never took up. I debated Pastor Eduardo. I put him in his place. I will put the link in the description. You can see. But this is the nonsense that they want to continue to spread. And it's sad. It really is sad.
About whether what a pastor or what a rabbi says or what a person with a title, what does the Tanakh really tell us?
Well, you tell me. It's right
Sure,
here. And
sure.
it starts in Isaiah 52, verse 13.
Sure.
Through Isaiah 53, verse 12.
But Jeff, they even go back further, right? From Isaiah 41 up to 49, you see that there is this servant individual.
Right.
And this servant individual is Israel. Israel, my servant. It says it over and over again. But yeah, Jeff, if we read the passage carefully, the servant Israel is dumb, deaf, and blind and doesn't fulfill the mission that it was set out to do, to be this kingdom of priests.
So let me ask you this, Pastor Eduardo, and I'll ask you this, Jeff Morgan, but of course you're both cowards that will never answer this question. Was Isaiah a dumb, deaf, and blind, deceitful servant? Isaiah the prophet, was he a dumb, deaf, blind, and deceitful prophet? Because according to their interpretation of Isaiah 53 and the suffering servant, all of the times that the servant is mentioned and it refers to as Israel, that only refers to a dumb, deaf, blind part of Israel. But only Jesus, they claim, is the true Israel, based on their eisegetical, nonsensical interpretation of, I believe it's Isaiah 49:3, which I just read to you. And there's no reason to assume that this would refer to only the Messiah, because nowhere else would. It's just not used that way in Scripture. Israel is Israel is Israel, right? Israel brings back the rest of Israel in the sense that Isaiah the prophet, the righteous remnant, brings back the rest of besieged Israel, as it says in Isaiah 49:3. Like, prophets are allowed to think of it this way. Isaiah is a part of Israel. Ezekiel is a part of Israel. The sinners among Israel are also a part of Israel. So when Israel is bringing back Israel, that's what's happening. Isaiah is bringing back the rest of the sinners. Elijah is bringing back the rest of the sinners. But for some reason, Christians have this nonsensical idea in their brain. It has to be one or the other. It's either Messiah or it's Israel. That is not the way the Hebrew Bible understands the prophecy. Prophecies can have more than one understanding, as even the New Testament authors understood, and we'll get to that, pointing out their hypocrisy in understanding prophecies to have more than one meaning.
So the correct interpretation is that there is an individual, one person within Israel who pays the price for Israel on behalf of Israel.
Right. So if someone says, no, it's Israel, that's partially true, because if, let's say, Yeshua was the Messiah, and he came from the people of Israel, and he was Jewish, so you could say that he was a representation of Israel.
He was the one with.
But he's not the exclusive represent. He's not like, why would he be the only reference that could be anything significant, right? That's an eisegetical interpretation. In Isaiah 49:3, it doesn't say anything about this Israel being some God-man, whatever. Like, it. What's very interesting is it never even uses the word David or king to describe what is mentioned in the servant songs regarding the servant, which demonstrates a very general understanding of who this servant is, which includes the Messiah but is not exclusive. And you see in passages, my favorite messianic passage, Hosea 3 verse 5, it uses the expression David their king, and all of the rabbis understand that to be the Messiah, son of David, because it's a Davidic king. That's what the Messiah is defined as. But suffering servant is a much more vague concept that is inclusive of the Messiah but not exclusive. And that's what Tovia Singer said at the beginning of the video. So we're all consistent in Rabbinic Judaism with how we exegete the passages. Christians, on the other hand, make it up as they go, painting the target around the arrow and saying bullseye.
Israel. This is important for people to understand that originally, when we speak about servant, Abraham was a servant. These were all servants. There were individuals who were servant and called out. A people come from Abraham, and this people stray. They break the covenantal promises, and that intimacy with God has to be restored, and it's done through that one individual. He's literally called an asham. He's a guilt offering,
right?
Or he takes upon our sin, our transgressions, our pain, because we have gone astray. And he is the one who has not. He's the faithful one, and this can only happen through this one individual servant.
So I'm glad you mentioned asham, because that word is used in Hebrew specifically in Isaiah 53 verse 10. And what an asham is, this is really important, is it's a guilt offering made with blood, and it is for restitution, right? It's basically making up for something that you did wrong. It's done in blood, and it's made to restore. It's made for restitution, and it specifically says asham, right? It's not any kind of sacrifice. You know, he made his, what does it say there in 53:10?
It says, but the Lord desired to crush him, causing him grief, if he renders himself as a guilt offering.
And so that's actually translated from the Hebrew word asham, which is a specific offering.
And this interpretation of focusing on the idea that this is Israel doesn't just stop there, it continues on. And this is what really embeds and solidifies within traditional Judaism. Abarbanel, Malbim in the 1800s, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch also in the 1800s says this is about Israel. And this is what affects our Jewish people as we go forward.
Okay, so I'm just gonna challenge you real quick.
Sure.
The Jewish people have been persecuted, blood has been shed. Why can't it just be the Jewish people?
Because the Jew.
Why can't it be the Jewish? So he's actually going to challenge him. Okay, so let's see if he actually challenges him in the correct way. So here's what Pastor Eduardo is going to say. Let's see.
Jewish people are already sinful. There's already wickedness. There's already a breaking of covenantal promise.
Okay, because the Jewish people are sinful? Where does it say in Isaiah 53 that the servant has to be completely sinless? Right? This is an eisegetical, nonsensical interpretation of what Isaiah 53 is speaking about, right? If you look in Zephaniah chapter 3, this is a very famous verse that Tovia Singer quotes from, right? He mentioned this earlier. He very aptly understands that Zephaniah 3 verse 9, I'll play it again for you. Just a second as this ad goes away.
Of the Mashiach, my servant, the Messiah. But then when you begin 53, it says it's talking about all the nation of Israel. Why do people sort of look at that verse and not this verse and quoting a professor and quoting a thing? Well, my witnesses declares the Lord, and Avdi, the exact same word as Isaiah 52 and 53, that's the same. That means the servant is plural, not singular. Now, I want to explain why people misunderstand Talmudic texts. So they don't understand Jewish position. I really should rephrase that. I don't mean to say that in a disparaging way. Forgive me for that. What I want to convey is that people do not understand what it is that Jewish people believe about Isaiah 53. We do not believe that Isaiah 53 is speaking about the righteous remnant of the Jews and not the Messiah. We don't believe the Messiah is not included in that. The Messiah is the most prominent figure at the end of days of the righteous remnant of the nation of Israel. And that's why the Talmud says, if you want examples of what will this remnant be like, of course, please do look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16.
Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16. So he mentioned that. So specifically, verse 13 says, the remnant of Israel shall neither commit justice nor commit lies, nor shall deceitful speech be found in their mouth, for they shall graze, lie down, and no one will cause them to shudder. Isaiah 53, verse 9. What does it say? Let's go to the actual text here. It says, though he had done no injustice and he had spoken no falsehood, right? So Zephaniah 3, verse 13 says, the remnant of Israel shall neither commit justice nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful speech be found in their mouth. Fulfillment. Oh no, well, the servant's got to be completely sinful. He's got to have no sin. Okay, so once again, was Isaiah a prophet? Why should you listen to Isaiah, Pastor Eduardo, if you believe he was a sinful man, right? Is Isaiah a trustworthy person? You're claiming he's deceitful because he's not Jesus, and you claim only Jesus can be the servant because he's supposedly sinless, and you have no way of proving that he was sinless other than you claim, trust me, bro, he was sinless. So, and by the way, I did a debate with Pastor Eduardo. I'll put the link in the description, and I really put him in his place, and he's been running from me ever since. I'm sure he won't respond to this video in any way, shape, or form. He's too busy creating his charlatry, church wherever, and whatever. We will. It's just pathetic at this point, man. Like, stop with the lies.
Promises and covenantal faithfulness between them and the Lord.
And so then what in 52:53 says that the Messiah has to be sinless?
Well, you can't be a sacrifice unless you're blemishless.
True.
So you have to have a perfect sacrifice. Jeff, if you were the Messiah, right, and you died, you can't pay the price for my sins because you have sin already.
Right.
You're a sinner. You've fallen short. I'm a sinner. I've fallen short. We need a perfect sacrifice.
Let's touch on that real quick.
So he's making up stuff that don't make any sort of coherent sense within this. If you go to Ezekiel chapter 4, there's an instance where Ezekiel suffers on behalf of other people. Okay? Does that mean that Ezekiel is, like, why can't he fit in terms of, suffering on behalf of other people? Why is that not, like, a Christian? How do they understand this? Like, Ezekiel isn't Jesus, yet you see him suffering and bearing the iniquity of others in Ezekiel chapter 4. When he lays on his side, it says, you will bear their iniquity, of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah. So what's the problem with Ezekiel being a part of the suffering servant of Isaiah 53? The Christian interpretation doesn't allow for that, but they claim, oh, you have to be a sinless. What are you talking about? You're making up stuff that isn't in the Tanakh, and you just are making it up as you go. Painting a target around the arrow and saying bullseye is not impressive to anybody with a brain. And that's what you're doing with Jesus.
Because it mirrors the sacrificial system and the priesthood. So when the priest went in to make atonement for the nation, he had to make a sacrifice of a sinless animal.
Absolutely.
For himself first.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You want to see an interesting sacrifice? Okay, let's go to the book of the writings, and let's go to the Psalms. All right? You guys familiar with the Psalms? I'm sure many of my viewers are. Not to be patronizing, but look at this. Look at this. Let's be real, okay? It says here, all this has befallen us, and we have not forgotten you. Neither have we betrayed your covenant, right? It explicitly says a group of people have not betrayed your covenant, the righteous remnant. Our heart has not turned back, nor our steps turned away from your path. Even when you crushed us in place of serpents, right? You covered us with darkness. This is the remnant, the righteous remnant. Remember in Isaiah 53? Isaiah 53, the Christians, you want to see who was being crushed in Isaiah 53? Right? Isn't there a verse here that talks about the crushing? But he was pained because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities, right? I know it's an English translation, but it's just to show you the imagery here, of the suffering remnant, Ezekiel being among them, right? It says, it is for your sake that we are killed all the time, that we are considered as sheep for slaughter. How is this not ringing bells, alarms with, remember, the suffering servant, and it says he was oppressed, he was afflicted, right? He was like a lamb brought to slaughter. Oh, a lamb brought to slaughter. Interesting. What do we just read in the Psalms? Oh, it is for your sake that we are killed all the time, and we are considered as sheep for the slaughter. Awaken. Why should you sleep, O Lord? Arouse yourself. Do not forsake us forever. My God, why have you forsaken us? Not just me, not just King David. This is a psalm written for the remnant, by the remnant. This is Israel. This is the suffering servant. Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. The remnant. Not Jesus.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but the Messiah is the perfect high priest. See, I think as believers, we miss this many times, but we have to really focus on this. The Messiah is not just the perfect sacrifice, but he's also the perfect sacrificer. And the writer of the book of Hebrews tells us that he doesn't have to offer a sacrifice for himself. That's how he can fulfill this role.
Yeah.
So this is ridiculous, right? The book of Hebrews is probably the most distortion-ridden, absurd bastardization of the Hebrew Bible. And I basically made this the centerpiece of my debate with Radar Apologetics. Once again, I'll put the link in the description. Hebrews 9:22 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin, which is false, as we see in the book of Leviticus, where we have confession of sin. We see that other ways are done to reconcile sins during times of exile, as Daniel did, as I mentioned over and over again in the debate. So, and then also the book of Hebrews contradicts itself when it says in Hebrews 10:4, it is impossible for the blood of goats and bulls to take away sin. Well, okay, then why are you saying that Leviticus 17:11, which refers only to animal sacrifices on the altar, when it says that that is one way to receive atonement for sins, but then you're saying that it's impossible to take away sin using the blood of goats and bulls? Well, then you can throw out Leviticus 17:11, Pastor Eduardo and Pastor Jeff Morgan. Anyway, so many contradictions and nonsensical interpretations that the New Testament brings to the table. Why would you have any shed of respect for it? Why would you have any shed of respect for either of these men who perpetuate these lies and distort rabbinic literature and the Tanakh for the sake of their false Messiah, Jesus? I don't know. But please like, share, and subscribe if you want to demonstrate why they are, basically spread to the world that they're wrong, and get this information out there, because too many people are falling for the lies of these two men.
He had to offer a sacrifice for himself and then bring in another animal. Then our sins are never really dealt with. They're never really paid for.
Okay, that makes sense. So if Isaiah 53 also...
That makes sense. Nowhere in the Tanakh does it say that the death of a sinless man is the only way to atone for your sins. But, I guess because the New Testament says it, I guess we'll go with that. What? Why? Why don't you care about what God has to say? But no, you only care about your false New Testament. This is proof right here.
Also says the servant was pierced for our transgressions. Well, you can even say wounded. We don't have to say pierced. We can say wounded for our transgressions. And had...
You're so humble. I can't believe you were... What a guy.
No deceit.
Yeah.
Right? So that kind of backs up what you were just talking about. But it also says he will prolong his days.
Sure.
Right? Is this like, could it be interpreted as resurrection language?
Absolutely.
I don't know. Let's look at the Targum. Remember? The Targum that they love so much, when it says they shall, their daughters might multiply and prolong their days. I don't know. I mean, if you want to talk about only resurrection language and whatever, be my guest. But if you want to ignore the fact that the Targum explicitly says, which you're apparently a big fan of, only when it says Messiah, and just ignore the parts that refer to the servant as a plurality of people, I mean, I guess you can do that, but no reason for us to respect you.
I think it can. I think the idea of being of an indestructible life. See, because he's the perfect sacrifice, because he's sinless, because he's holy, the grave could not hold him. So although he laid himself...
Because you're making up and basically spewing out diarrhea out of your mouth that has no validity, and you give us no reason to believe that Jesus was sinless other than, trust me, bro, he was sinless. And who cares if he was sinless? It doesn't prove... Being sinless doesn't automatically give you the keys to being the Messiah and Chas v'shalom becoming a God-man. None of this makes any sense. It's sort of like saying, I need to get my car fixed, and then somebody says, okay, I'll fix it for you. I'm going to do a backflip, and then I'm going to fly in the sky. And then it's like, my car's still not fixed. But I flew. I've performed a miracle. Human beings can't fly. You don't even need a car anymore. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, I could only fly once. I'll do it again, when I come back sometime. But you saw me fly, so you have the guarantee that when I come back, you won't need your car anymore because you'll be flying. But I still can't fly. But I flew. And when I come back, then you'll be able to fly. But my car still wasn't fixed. So this person claims that because they flew in the air and did a backflip, that one day your car will be fixed. But your car was never fixed. I don't care if you saw the man fly. He still didn't fix your car. Just like, I don't care if Jesus resurrected from the dead. There's still no world peace. There's still sin in the world. Jesus didn't solve the problem of sin, no matter how many times you lie through your teeth saying otherwise.
Down, he was risen again from the other side, and indeed his days are prolonged, and he reigns as the king of Israel forever.
Right, so there's clear terminology within Isaiah 50.
Once again, you can say that all you want. I could say that Jerry Seinfeld is reigning and he's going to come back someday after, may he live to 120. But I'm saying, you could do it with anybody in history or today and say that they are going to be the one. It would have just as much validity as you claiming Jesus did because Jesus didn't do anything. That's the point.
53 that says that this suffering servant will be cut off,
Sure.
but yet will prolong his days.
Yeah,
right?
resurrection language.
That's cool. That's cool. To wrap this up,
But just ignore the parts of the Targum that say his sons and his daughters will have prolonged days. And yeah. Good. Cool. Yeah. Forget about that part. Does not matter when it says that. Cool.
are you saying that there, before the 11th, 12th centuries, there is no rabbinical source that says Isaiah 53 is speaking about the people of Israel?
This is a big claim, but none that I can explicitly find.
Okay.
It seems that
None that he can explicitly find. Really. We just went through all of them. The Targum in Isaiah 53. The Targum in Isaiah 52. Brachot 5a, where it explicitly says, and relating this back to Isaiah 53:10, which the Targum, which the Talmud validates as being a valid interpretation of the Tanakh, right? Translation. It says, this verse says that in whomever God delights, not just the Messiah, he afflicts with illness. Wow. So that shows that the suffering of not just the Messiah, but also Ezekiel, also Isaiah, also Jeremiah, also the righteous remnant of Israel, which is inclusive of the future Messiah, that is applicable to all of them in Isaiah 53:10, according to the Talmud, according to the Targum. What aren't you getting about this? How many times do we have to throw it in your face to prove it to you without you running around saying Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah and ignoring all of the other things that the rabbis say, all of the wisdom that you basically ignore and profane? It's disgusting. What more can I say? You're a liar.
throughout all the sources they were searching, there are no sources before this time period that explicitly say Isaiah 53 is about Israel.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, you could just go on Jews for Judaism and see that you're lying, because it says even within the concept of the church fathers, they understand that the interpretation was about Israel based on the Jews that they were speaking to at the time. So, I mean, it's really interesting when your own church fathers tell on themselves and you can't even acknowledge them as saying these types of things. But no, just keep contextually abusing rabbis and see where that gets you.
That's a pretty big statement.
That is a big
So what we're
statement.
saying is that this is the understood interpretation, and then at some point, something changed.
There was a
Something
shift.
changed. Yeah, there was a shift in history. Now, why should we believe what we would call the modern interpretation that
What you would call you lying about the source material, and like Pastor Eduardo, I have confronted him with these sources before. He knows them. He is willingly lying. Okay? Jeff Morgan, I don't know as well. I'm pretty sure, I mean, both of them have heard these conversations over and over again. They are willingly ignoring and distorting the context of these rabbinic sources as well as the Hebrew Bible. It's as simple as that.
it is about Israel? Why would people buy that?
Yeah, I think there's something in the psyche, something in the heart, something in the mind that this is more Jewish. That this is what I've inherited. This is what's more familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
To believe that Isaiah 53 is about Israel is, for the Jewish mind, is at home with Judaism. This is what Judaism teaches. But is it at home with the Tanakh? I think this is the biggest question.
It's a big question.
And when we go to Isaiah 41 and 49, as we said, Israel is the servant in many spaces and many places of the Hebrew Bible, even in the context of 41 to 49 leading up.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that Israel as a servant fails, is wicked, dumb, deaf, and blind.
Mm-hmm.
But the servant is not. The servant is righteous. The servant can bear the sins. The servant is a blemishless sacrifice. So we see the distinction and the difference between it. And so if
Once again, you look at Isaiah 49:3. Is this about Isaiah? Why can't this be about Isaiah? And if not, do you believe that Isaiah was a dumb, deaf, blind, lying, deceitful servant? Or do you believe that he was a righteous servant of the righteous remnant? You can throw out the book of Isaiah if you're going to scorn the name of Isaiah and say that he was not righteous. Clearly, he is understood to be a part of that righteous remnant, right? Why in the world would you listen to a word that Isaiah has to say if you believe he was just a lying, bumbling fool? that you claim all of Israel is, aside from your false Messiah? Where's the room for the righteous remnant? How do you understand Psalm 44 here, when it says that the remnant has not forgotten your covenant? Pastor Eduardo has no answer for this, nor does Jeff Morgan. Neither of these guys know. They don't care. They're just trying to say, you know, here's Jesus. We're painting the target around the arrow. Look how impressive this is. We know the trick. We know the smoke and mirror show. Stop perpetuating these lies.
If you're a Jewish person out there thinking about this, considering if Yeshua is the Messiah, could the historical interpretation actually be true? You have to go back to the Tanakh and know that Israel themselves cannot pay for the sins of Israel. We need a sacrifice.
Right. And there's actually a really interesting way to look at this, because if the people of Israel are that suffering servant that they're speaking about, then it's a bit absurd, because what the text is saying then, if you put that interpretation in place, is that the suffering of Israel brings about forgiveness and redemption for those that are perpetrating the anti-Semitic acts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So Israel suffers, and then therefore those that are committing the acts are considered righteous.
Absolutely. And
So here's what's even more absurd than that, because you're making fun of the concept of what God is speaking about regarding the interaction between Israel and our oppressors. What's even more absurd to me is that Christians go around saying that Jews killed Jesus, blaming us for that, and then attacking us, doing all these anti-Jewish things, and they never even said you're welcome once. Because according to your twisted, backwards, ridiculous theology, the only way for you to atone for your sins and receive forgiveness and salvation is for Jesus' blood to be shed on a cross, which not one verse of the Hebrew Bible ever states that is a necessity in order for us to gain forgiveness, atonement, and or salvation. But your eisegetical, warped New Testament nonsense claims that that's the only way for that to happen. So why aren't you thanking, right, the Jews or the Pharisees or the people that were the opposition to Jesus for what they did in killing Jesus? That is supposed to be the most righteous thing imaginable, right? So why are they the synagogue of Satan? Why does Paul say that they're contrary to all men? Why does Jesus call them the sons of the devil for trying to kill him? That is the most backwards, messed up theology. And that's what you believe. So why don't you take the plank out of your proverbial eye, as your false Messiah claims a broken clock is right twice a day, my friend, and recognize the hypocrisy of your absurd, just, I don't even know what word to describe, asinine religion.
And it's something interesting to think about, the sinfulness of humanity. That all of us have sinned, all of us have fallen short. We can't pay the price for another person. This is why animals were brought. And if you think about Aaron the high priest, or any priest that ever came after, if they made a mistake in their service as priests, what happened?
They were killed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Right.
Immediately. And pulled out. Such a holy service to do that you had to be pulled out. So if you made any misstep as a priest, you were pulled out. This is a foreshadowing and a type of the Messiah and the perfection of his service, the perfectness of who he is and what he was set out to do.
So I want you to read a couple passages.
So when you talk about foreshadowing, it's basically a Christian's idea of circular reasoning. That's the way that you can interpret that word whenever they use those words, types and shadows. It doesn't have anything impressive to give about fulfillment of messianic prophecy. It's just a way for Christians to, like, you know, circularly reason things that Jesus didn't fulfill and claim that it was all pointing to him in the end. Yay. Not impressive to anybody who actually cares to understand what the Hebrew Bible says.
Is from Isaiah 52:13 through Isaiah 53:12. Can you read the part about how this servant is high and lifted up?
Sure. It says, "Behold, my servant will prosper. He'll be high and lifted up and greatly exalted."
Okay.
What's fascinating about this, these verbal forms are the same verbal forms that are used for the Lord when Isaiah sees him high and lifted up in his glory, where the train of his robe filled the temple.
Another time when one of our prophets actually sees God face to face, but that's another episode.
Absolutely.
But that's great, because in Hebrew, Ram v'nisa v'gava me'od, high and lifted up and exalted, these are terms, like you said, that are only used for God in the book of Isaiah.
Absolutely.
So this is another falsehood. I can't even believe, so this is like Sam Shamoon likes to use this argument all the time. It's stupidity, it's sophomoric, it's nonsense, right? So think about these words, right? High and lifted up, okay? So you have these words, they talk about this word like Ram Vinisa, right? High and lifted up, or high and exalted, or these types of things. And you see in Isaiah chapter 2, it's talking about, it says, for the Lord of hosts has a day over everyone high and proud. It says, Ram al kol nisa, right? And over everyone exalted, he shall become humble, right? What does these words, Ram Vinisa, mean, right? All they mean is high and exalted, or, can something be higher than something else? Is Moses more high than, Joshua? Okay, so he was more higher relative to another person. So using these words and claiming that these words are like exclusively divine and they can only refer to God, it's like saying, we say that God is great and good, right? Does that mean that because you use the words great and good that now you're talking about only a divine, entity? No, that's stupid. So likewise, just because the servant is described as being exalted and high, right? Ram Vinisa, that does not mean that, this is only about God. This can only refer to God. This is the stupidity and sophomoric idiocy that these people resort to in order to try to perpetuate the lies about, something can be higher than something else. Obviously, God is the most high. Obviously, God is the most exalted. But when you look at the way that it's used in Isaiah 2, it's saying relative to other people, right? People can be low and people can be high, and God is the most high. That's the way the word is used. If you look at these words, Rum, Anashim, Viniskav, right? The haughty eyes of men will be humbled, right? And the height of men, so they were height, and then they shall be bowed down. So they were high, and then they will be bowed down. So saying that this word Rum is exclusively to God and has no other. Yes, God is the most high, but anyone else can be high relative to something else based on the perspective. That's the silliness.
That's telling as well. Now, from Isaiah 53 onward, we have references to the crucifixion.
Sure.
Yeah, can you read some of those?
Okay, so from Isaiah 53:4, let's read about the description of what this servant is going to go through. However, it was our sicknesses that he himself bore, and our pains that he carried. Yet we ourselves assumed that he had been afflicted, struck down by God, and humiliated. But he was pierced for our offenses, wounded for our offenses. He was crushed for our wrongdoings. The punishment of our well-being was laid upon him, and by his wounds we are healed.
Wow. Okay, so let's wrap this up with the last couple of verses in Isaiah 53.
So you see here, right, the whole idea, this fits with Israel, right? The idea that Israel suffers, and ultimately the nations will recognize that the suffering of Israel was ultimately for the greater good of the world, right? That ultimately Israel will be exalted, and we see that exemplified in Isaiah 49:3-6. It does not say that the Gentiles are going to be saved first and they're going to get the salvation first, and then the Jews are going to be like, oh, we were so stupid. Why didn't we believe in Jesus? It says the opposite. Let's look at the chronology of this in Isaiah 49:3. It says, he said to me, you are my servant Israel, about whom I will boast. And I said, I toiled in vain. I consumed my strength for naught. In vanity, surely my right is with the Lord, and my deed is with God. And now the Lord who formed me as in the womb to be a servant to him, and said to bring Jacob back to him, and Israel shall be gathered to him, and I will be honored in the eyes of the Lord. And God was my strength. And he said, it is too light for you to be my servant, to establish the tribes of Jacob, and to bring back the besieged of Israel. But I will make you a light of nations, so that my salvation shall be until the end of the earth. Look at the chronology. First, the servant brings back the rest of Israel, right? You have the remnant of Israel bringing back the besieged of Israel, the more sinful part of Israel. And then the fully restored Israel will serve as a light to the Goyim. That's the chronology, not, oh, we missed our Messiah and then we're going to believe in Jesus and, after we realize that the Gentiles were right all along. No, that's a Christian nonsensical interpretation. When you look in Zephaniah chapter 8, you get that same message. It does not say that, and I'm actually making this video right now during the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av, right? This is a very sad time of mourning, right? Ultimately, we're going to fast so in between the fast of the 4th and the 5th month, right? We're going to be fasting in the 5th month. And that's Tisha B'Av, and that's relating to the house of Judah, which has nothing to do with the church or the apostles or Jesus. And this verse, these fasts are very much in line with rabbinic Judaism. That's how we know that when it says, so said the Lord of hosts in those days, when 10 men of all the languages in the nation so take hold of the skirt of a Jewish man, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Those are rabbinic Jews, right? The Jewish man is a rabbinic Jewish man, not some Jesus, believing Jew or something like that, because this has nothing to do with Jesus believing Jews. They don't fast during these days for the destruction of the temple. They don't celebrate these days as festivals of joy. This has nothing to do with Christian observance or Christian belief. And Zechariah chapter 8 is quoted nowhere in the New Testament because Jesus didn't fulfill it, and it has nothing to do with Jesus. And once again, another proof why Jesus is not the Messiah, and that it is not the Gentiles who will be leading the light to the Jews in the future Messianic era, but rather the Jews, the rabbinic Jews, who fast on these days, such as Tisha B'Av, right? Who will be a light to the Gentiles, ultimately. And these two individuals have fallen for the lies of the New Testament, unfortunately.
All right, so the last couple of verses of Isaiah 53 are very powerful. As a result of the anguish of his soul, his crucifixion, his pain, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, righteous, will justify the many, for he will bear their wrongdoings. Therefore, I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the plunder with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was counted with wrongdoers. Yet he himself bore the sins of many and interceded for the wrongdoers. What immediately comes to mind as I think about this is the imagery of Aaron again, going into the holy place, the Holy of Holies. And as he wore the holy priestly garments, he wore upon his garments the names of the sons of Israel, and he carried them into the presence of God. Aaron is a type and a shadow. Aaron fails in fulfilling what the Messiah ultimately would do. The Messiah, being the perfect, being the righteous one, can carry the names of all of Israel and indeed the whole world directly into the presence of God so that we can be forgiven.
Wow. And Jesus epically failed at doing any of that, much more so than you could say that Aaron failed, because Jesus is literally dead. And even if you claim he resurrected, you have no way to prove that he was sinless. You have no way to prove that he is sitting at the right hand of God in heaven any more than I can prove that Jesus is sitting at the left foot of Satan in hell. Literally no way for you to prove anything that you claim, because sin still exists in the world. There is no world peace, and Jesus didn't fulfill any of Zechariah 8, any of Isaiah 53, any of Isaiah 49. None of these prophecies have been fulfilled. You can claim that he did or that he'll come back and do them later, but you don't have any evidence of such, which is why the Jews rightly reject your false Messiah. You call Jesus Yeshua, Yeshka, Wishy-washy, whatever, and he is not God, and he is not the Messiah.
Okay, so going back and looking over what we covered inside this video, the historical sources indeed agreed that Isaiah 53 was about the Messiah, about an individual. There was in the 11th century this polemical shift where intentionally the rabbis began to portray the servant in Isaiah 53 as Israel. This was a polemical shift, and we don't need to hold on to this polemical shift. The real question we need to ask ourselves is not if we're being true to rabbinic tradition, but are we being true to the Tanakh? Are we being true to the words that the God of Israel has given his people?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I just want to challenge everybody out there to open up the Tanakh for yourself. Don't go to a rabbi, don't go to a priest, don't go to a pastor. Open it up for yourself, the Old Testament, Isaiah 52, verse 13 through Isaiah 53:12, and read for yourself, and let us know.
Too late. You already went to a pastor, Pastor Eduardo, right here, and you heard all sorts of ridiculous, absurd lies about rabbinic Judaism, the Hebrew Bible, and how Isaiah 53 is understood by the rabbis as well as just anybody who is reading the Tanakh with an open and an understanding of what truth is, there's no reason why we have to assume that Isaiah 53 can only refer as the servant, referring to only one singular individual, when you see over and over again the servant being referred to as Israel. But hey, if you want to distort the words of the rabbis, if you want to distort the words of the Tanakh, then you can believe what these two charlatans have to say. But if you're looking for truth and you want to actually follow in the ways of the Torah, then please acknowledge Rabbinic Judaism, acknowledge the Holy Scriptures for what they are. The servant is Israel, that is inclusive of the Messiah. And I guess I should end on this note to expose the hypocrisy of Christianity. I forgot to mention this. So in the book of Matthew, right, there's a famous passage that says that Jesus went to, Egypt when he was a baby with Joseph, his, adoptive father, supposedly. And it says that, he was there to stay until the death of King Herod, and then he came back to Israel from Egypt, and it said this was fulfilled through the prophet, according to Matthew. Out of Egypt I called my son. So who's this son, according to Hosea 11:1? Well, according to Hosea 11:1, let's look who that son is. Was this a sinless servant? Because remember, Pastor Eduardo claims that the Messiah has to be sinless. So if there's a passage that refers to a sinful individual, then, and this is also referring to Jesus, then why would we include that as a prophecy about Jesus? Well, anyway, it says, "For when Israel was young, I loved him, and from Egypt I called my son. The more they called to them, the more they went away from them, and to the Baalim they would slaughter sacrifices." Out of Egypt I called my son is not a sinless son. But Matthew had no problem quoting it in relation to who he claims Jesus to be, right? So out of Egypt I called my son is actually referring in its original context to a sinful Israel, but Matthew has no problem applying it to Jesus. So then why in the world would our friend Pastor Eduardo have a problem with Isaiah 53 referring to a sinful Israel, right? Because clearly he's claiming that in Isaiah 49, and I've heard him say this before, he makes the absurd claim that Isaiah 49:3, when it says Israel, that it can only refer to the Messiah and not to Israel because Israel's sinful. Well, if Matthew is allowed to refer to the son, out of Egypt I called my son, to Jesus, when it's referring to a sinful Israel in the immediate context, then why can't Isaiah 49 verse 3, when it says, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will boast, who will ultimately be a light to the nations," the Goyim, why can't that also refer to not just the Messiah, but also the rest of Israel, a plurality of people? Dr. Michael Brown won't let you do that because you're still beholden under his nose? That's what I thought, Pastor Eduardo. Anyway, I hope this video has been a blessing to you all. Please like, share, and subscribe. Shalom Aleichem.